Hello, my name is Lisa Waddell, and I am going to be sharing with you some information about a learning format called the Universal Design for Learning. And let me go ahead and share my screen, and then we can get started with the presentation. So, like I said, Universal Design for Learning, and if you look at the title slide, it says that it is learning designed for all, which that's exactly what it is. It is meeting the needs of the learning needs of every student that you have. So just to give a little bit of an overview, what exactly is UDL, or Universal Design for Learning? It's a research-based framework that is designed to remove barriers to learning. So you might ask, so what exactly are barriers? Barriers are basically anything that keeps a student from being able to learn, whether that is lack of interest, lack of engagement. It could be that they physically are not able to see what it is that's on the chalkboard, not able to physically take notes, not able to have the knowledge or ability to access something on the internet. Anything like that. Those would all be considered barriers to education. So that could be physical, it could be emotional, it could be interest, it could be anything that is going to inhibit a student's ability to learn or to receive information. So who is UDL for? Well, like I said, it addresses the needs of all learners. And when I'm talking all learners, I'm talking about all age groups. Your typical learners, your learners with exceptionalities, your learners that are gifted, your learners that might have physical disabilities or intellectual disabilities, cognitive disabilities, any student. It is designed to be able to meet the needs of all students. So it sounds really great. And, when you take all of those things into account, why does it work? Well, students are able to learn according to their learning preferences, and they can demonstrate what they've learned in a variety of ways. And so it's a framework that is very student-centered, focusing primarily on what it is that you're wanting the student to learn, not so much as how you're going to dictate how that happens. So just as we get into it, talking about the principles of Universal Design for Learning, there are three principles, and these principles are what drives all of your lesson planning and preparation. Taking these three things into consideration and examining them helps you to be able to remove those barriers that might be present with typical teaching styles or typical teaching methods. So the first one is representation. That's presenting information and content in a variety of ways. So taking what it is that you want students to learn and teaching them, sharing it with them in a number of different ways, not just standing up and lecturing, but it could be through PowerPoint, it could be through role play, it could be through discussion. There's lots of different ways that the information, can be presented. The second is action and expression. So this is students are given a variety of assessment options. So it's not just we're going to do a paper and pencil test, but it could be maybe they're going to make a little movie, or maybe they are going to make a PowerPoint presentation, or maybe they want to write a report, or maybe they want to give an oral report. It is taking those things that they feel that they're good at, their strengths, and building on those to help them to be able to show what it is that they've learned. Finally, engagement. Taking what it is that you're trying to teach a student, however dry or uninteresting it may be, but trying to tie it back to help students to understand the meaning, why it is that's important for them to be able to learn it. And also motivating students, keeping them engaged during the learning and teaching process. So when you're talking about planning for instruction, these are 4 things to take into consideration. These are separate these are separate from the principles that we just talked about right up here. But here, this is you're into the planning phase now. So taking these 4 things into consideration. First of all, your learning goals. So what is the expectation? What is it that you want your students to learn? Not necessarily how it is, but what do you want them to get out of what it is that you're teaching? If you are doing reading and you are wanting to teach students about the difference between informational text or fiction and nonfiction, or in math, being able to multiply double digits, that's your learning goal, what it is that you're wanting to teach your students. The second thing is your instructional materials. So what is it that you're going to use to teach the content? And for a lot of teachers, it's textbooks and paper and pencil. But with UDL, it kind of requires you to think outside the box a little bit as far as the materials that you might need to use, because you have to take into consideration the different ways that students learn, and also the things that keep them from learning. And we're going to get into each of these more specifically here in just a minute. The next thing is your instructional methods, how the content will be, how it is that you're going to teach your students. Are you going to lecture? Are you going to do a slideshow? Things like that. So we'll get into more of that in just a minute. The final thing is an assessment. How is it that you are going to assess what your students have learned? How are they going to be assessed? For a lot of teachers, like I said, it's paper and pencil, taking a test. And so it's your job as a teacher to figure out how all of these things can be adjusted, how they can be changed or combined in order to reduce the barriers to learning that students that they sometimes experience. So it's definitely a checklist to consider. So very briefly, for the next 5 minutes, turn to your partner, shoulder partner, and you have discussion. Discussion regarding the Universal Design for Learning and what it is that we've learned so far. Okay, moving on. So when we are talking about the things that we need to keep in mind when it comes to your planning for students under the Universal Design for Learning framework. First thing is learning goals. So the learning goals should be designed in a way that removes as many barriers to learning as possible. You want to focus your learning goals more on, like I said earlier, what exactly it is that you want the students to learn, not how it is that you want them to learn or a specific way that you want them to do that. Identifying the intent. What is it that you want your students to learn? The reason why this is important is because doing this will help to decide how students can access information and show what they've learned. Instead of you as the teacher being the one to completely dictate all of that, taking the lead from students and keeping in mind some of the limitations that some of them might have will help you to determine how it is that you are going to help them access the information and to show you what it is that they've learned. Finally, when you identify a learning goal, it helps to create flexibility for students to learn in a way that most meets their learning needs. It encourages engagement because they are they are maybe involved. Maybe it's something that they are physically having to do, something that is, builds interest with them. And also it promotes accessibility for all students. The next thing is your instructional materials. What is it you are going to use to teach whatever topic it happens to be? Materials should be accessible to all learners and remove as many barriers as possible. Giving options for how students receive information allows students to choose options that are most engaging and appealing to them. If your concern focuses more on what it is that a student is going to learn versus how they're going to gain that information, or what it is that they're going to use to gain that information, it makes that process much more flexible. Doing things like combining a lecture with slides or pictures helps to maintain engagement. If the students are supposed to be reading a textbook, being able to provide that text in a digital format, it delivers the information in the best way possible, because digital formatting it can be manipulated. The font size can be increased for students who might have visual limitations. Speech to text for students who have reading comprehension issues or who have decoding issues. Increasing text size is another thing I already talked about that, but it helps for students that have visual disabilities. Highlighting keywords or phrases helps students to stay focused and to stay organized and to hone in on the most important pieces of what it is that they are reading or hearing versus getting caught up in all of the details. So these are just a few things that can be, that you need to keep in mind, and a few things to consider, and ways that you can kind of manipulate and change up your instructional materials away from the traditional paper and pencil, so that learning is accessible for all students. The third thing is the instructional methods. How is it that you are going to teach? So information should be presented in a variety of ways, helping to increase student engagement. Like I said, like a lecture combined with a PowerPoint or slides. Maybe some physical activities incorporated into whatever it is that you're doing, like projects or object lessons, so that you keep engagement high and you are able to turn what it is that students are learning back into the why of their learning, helping them to understand why what they're learning is, how it's going to be important to them in their future, why it's important. Another thing to keep in mind is that when you're able to tie students' prior knowledge back into what it is that you are teaching, it helps to create more effective instruction, because they're not starting from square one. They already have a basis, and you are just building on that foundation that they have established already. Providing choices of content and tools for instruction that gives students some freedom. It also helps students who might have limitations. It helps to take those things into consideration so that it makes a more level playing field for all students who are learning. Finally, providing challenging expectations for student learning, wanting to create challenge, but still make learning accessible. It's not so much about watering down your content, but just it's more about how it is that you present your information. Finally, assessments. So assessments are important, obviously, because that's how we know what it is that students are learning. It also helps us to know if we're being effective teachers. If you're teaching and nobody is understanding, you know that you as a teacher need to be doing something different, or we need to be starting back and creating more of a foundation before we move on. So assessments are very important. There's a lot of ways to assess student learning that is very far and away from paper and pencil tests. But allowing students flexibility in how they demonstrate what they've learned is something that is very important. Maybe you have a student that has a lot of test anxiety. So obviously they're not going to do very well on an actual test. But if you give them the opportunity to create a project or a diorama or a mobile or a poster, they are able to show you everything that they know about whatever concept it was that you were teaching, but it doesn't require them to sit down with paper and pencil and take the test. Another thing is that in UDL, providing the flexibility in assessments allows students to capitalize on their preferred learning modalities. Some students are kinesthetic learners, some students are visual learners, some students are auditory learners. And while those aren't necessarily like learning styles per se, those are just the preferred way or the most effective way that students recognize that they take in information. And so when you are flexible with your assessment, it allows them to be able to build on those strengths that they have, those learning strengths, to be able to show what it is that they have learned. Assessments should include supports such as spell check, text to speech, so to account for students who have written expression issues, for students who have issues with regard to decoding and or reading comprehension issues. And they should also be leveled to provide rigor for students to be able to show what it is that they learned while still having your learning goals attainable for them. Finally, sorry, I was interrupted. Finally, assessments should be continuous and they should be ongoing throughout the span of the unit that is being taught, as opposed to waiting till the end when you're finished and then assessing and finding out that, well, students didn't learn everything that they should have learned. When you are doing those formative assessments along the way, you have as a teacher have a better idea and handle on what it is that students are learning. So as we kind of come to the end of our presentation, there are some challenges to implementation. In an article written by Smith and various others, they were evaluating universal design for learning, and through the process of interviewing teachers, these are some of the challenges, the themes regarding challenges that came up when talking about implementing and beginning to use universal design for learning, switching from your typical teaching methods to this framework. The first was lack of time, lack of work days, larger caseloads, make it difficult to plan for the implementation of UDL with fidelity, which is always what it is that we want to be able to do. We don't want to do something in an incorrect way or halfway. We want to be able to do it. We want to implement with fidelity. And it takes time when you're learning something new and you're learning new strategies yourself as a teacher. It takes some time to figure that out. And we all know that as teachers, there's always a lack of time. The other thing is lack of training. And that ties back into also implementing with fidelity, but being able to have someone who can coach you or instruct you and have examples to follow really helps with being able to to create and use this great teaching framework in your own classrooms. Concerns about creating opportunities for learners with most significant needs. Many teachers don't have experience working with students who have significant disabilities. And so that can be a challenge when taking the general education curriculum and trying to make it accessible for all students. Another thing is your lack of funding. In the lack of funding in education to be able to have trainings and things like that. And finally, technology. While it is definitely an asset when using UDL, it can also sometimes serve as a barrier for teachers that aren't familiar or comfortable with technology, or having to learn a new type of technology to be able to assist students. And even, you know, the internet doesn't want to work today, or the laptops need to be updated, or whatever it is. There's always going to be a problem when it comes to technology, unfortunately. So it can serve as a barrier, even as it serves as a very important component to universal design for learning. So finally, as we wrap up, talking about some of the benefits. What are the benefits of universal design for learning? Why is it such a good framework? Why is it something that has been proven to work? For starters, it increases the engagement of students with and without disabilities, which that's exactly what it is that you want. You want your students to be engaged. You want them to be involved. Goals for students with most significant disabilities, as opposed to placing them in an inclusive setting for the purposes of socialization or participation. Now you have taken grade level curriculum and made it more accessible to them. And they are able to actually work on more academic based goals in those inclusive environments. Improved personal responsibility and completion of work for students. When they take ownership of it, when they are able to help make choices with how things are going to be, how they're going to be assessed, or things like that. They take ownership of it because it's their personal choice. There's an increase in empathy and positive relationships between non-disabled students and those with significant disabilities, simply because they are now in the same environment and they are interacting with one another, and they are learning together and doing projects together and being in groups together. And having that exposure to one another helps to build those positive relationships. And finally, an increase in collaboration between disabled and non-disabled students. Like I said, when you have disabled students who are now able to, especially those with significant disabilities who would normally be considered to be self-contained students, when they are able to be in a general education classroom, accessing their grade level curriculum, they are going to be working with non-disabled students and being able to work with them and collaborate with them. And that's a huge plus for everyone. In closing, most of my information was taken from the IRIS Center, and I also included a couple of additional resources if you would like to read more or learn more with regard to universal design for learning. So in closing, finally, I would just like you to take a moment and leave a sticky note with something that you learned today about universal design for learning. Thank you very much.